I'm Daniel Graves. Yes, that's my actual surname. And yes, I've heard every joke. A licensed mortician and embalmer at Oakwood Funeral Home in Springfield, Illinois. I've been in this profession for 12 years now, working my way up from a funeral assistant to lead embalmer. When you tell people what you do for a living, they either change the subject immediately or lean in with morbid curiosity. They want to know about the weirdest cases, the celebrity bodies, the mistakes that haunt you. I've handled over 2,000 bodies in my career. Accident victims, suicides, the elderly who died peacefully in their sleep, decomposed remains found weeks after death, murder victims with wounds that told stories the detectives were still piecing together. I've reconstructed faces so badly damaged that even I couldn't look at the before photos for too long. I've drained blood, replaced fluids, wired jaws, glued eyes, positioned hands, and applied makeup to make the deceased look like they're only sleeping. Though they never really do, not if you know what to look for. The prep room is my domain. Stainless steel tables with drainage systems, the constant hum of ventilation fans pulling formaldehyde fumes away, the precise rows of trocars, scalpels, and arterial tubes. Everything has its place. Everything follows a procedure. In this profession, you need that order. You need the routine. Because what you're working with, who you're working with, demands respect, focus, and an almost meditative calm. But what I'm about to tell you is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about death, about what happens to us after our hearts stop beating, and about whether some part of us might refuse to let go. It was a Tuesday night in late October 3 years ago. I remember because it was 2 days before Halloween, and the funeral home had its seasonal decorations up. Tasteful autumn wreaths, nothing macabre. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was scheduled for the overnight shift, which meant I'd be alone in the building from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. This wasn't unusual. Most of our embalming work happens at night when families aren't visiting, when the phones stop ringing, when the world outside goes quiet. The body had arrived around 9 p.m. before the day staff left. Male, 34 years old, named Tyler Bennett. The police report indicated he died by suicide, hanging, discovered by his roommate after Tyler hadn't shown up for work for 2 days. Time of death was estimated at 72 hours before discovery. The autopsy had been completed that afternoon, so he was cleared for embalming and preparation for a closed casket service scheduled for Saturday. I'd read the intake paperwork while finishing my coffee in the arrangement office. Suicide cases always carry a particular weight. You wonder about those final moments, what desperation or pain drove someone to that choice. But you can't let those thoughts consume you. The job is the job. The deceased deserves your best work, regardless of how they died. At 11:15 p.m., I locked the front doors, checked that all the chapels were empty, and headed down to the prep room in the basement. The fluorescent lights flickered twice before steadying, old ballast that Tom, our director, kept meaning to replace. The air down there always felt heavier, colder, even with the heating system running. Something about being underground, I suppose. Tyler Bennett's body was in cold storage, drawer 17. I rolled out the refrigerated tray, and even through the black body bag, I could see he was a tall man, probably 6'3". The autopsy staples ran in a Y incision down his chest, standard procedure. I transferred him onto the embalming table, unzipped the bag, and began my initial assessment. His face was discolored, with the expected lividity patterns and the ligature mark around his neck. A deep, dark furrow where the rope had compressed tissue and blood vessels. His eyes were partially open, clouded with the milky film of death. His mouth hung slack. Nothing about his appearance was unusual for someone who'd been deceased for approximately 96 hours, including discovery time and autopsy delay. I started with the standard prep work, disinfecting the body, setting features. I used eye caps, small, spiky plastic discs that go under the eyelids to keep them closed and maintain a natural eye shape. I injected tissue builder into his sunken cheeks, a common need for hanging victims due to the way gravity affects blood pooling. I wired his jaw shut using the needle injector method, a small hole through the lower jawbone and another through the nasal septum, connected with wire. Then I began the embalming process. I made an incision above his right clavicle to locate the carotid artery and jugular vein. Using my aneurysm hook, I carefully separated them, the artery for injecting embalming fluid, the vein for drainage. I inserted the arterial tube, secured it with ligature, and connected it to our Porty Boy machine, which would pump approximately 2 gallons of formaldehyde-based fluid through his circulatory system. I'd done this exact procedure hundreds of times. Muscle memory guided my hands. I started the machine, set the pressure to 15 psi, and watched as the pink fluid began flowing through the clear tubes into Tyler Bennett's body. That's when I noticed his right hand. It was clenched into a tight fist. Not unusual by itself, cadaveric spasm sometimes causes muscles to contract and hold position. But something about it caught my attention. I walked around the table to get a better look. His knuckles were white, the fingers curled so tightly that the nails were digging into his palm. I'd need to massage the rigor mortis out before positioning his hands in the casket. I returned to the head of the table to monitor the embalming machine. The fluid was flowing properly, the pressure steady. But then I noticed something else. His left eye, the one I just placed an eye cap under and closed, was open. Just slightly, maybe a quarter inch, but definitely open. I sighed. It happens occasionally. The tissue relaxes, or I hadn't positioned the cap correctly. I lifted the lid, adjusted the cap, and pressed the lid down firmly. It stayed closed. I checked the right eye, still properly sealed. Back to monitoring the machine. The fluid counter showed half a gallon distributed. His skin was beginning to firm up nicely, the chemical preservation process doing its work. I made notes on my prep sheet. Time started, pressure settings, estimated fluid needed. A soft thump came from behind me. I turned around. Nothing. The prep room was empty except for me and Tyler. The only sounds were the machine's motor and the gurgle of drainage fluid collecting in the sink. Old building settling, I told myself. Or rats in the walls. We'd had problems with them last winter. I turned back to the body. His left hand was now clenched in a fist, too. Both hands in tight fists, rigid, tendons standing out under the skin. My stomach dropped, but my rational mind immediately supplied explanations. The embalming fluid increases pressure in the tissue, can cause muscle contractions, settling of the body on the table, redistribution of remaining rigor mortis. I've seen bodies move before. Slight turns of the head, air escaping the lungs in a sound like a sigh, even limbs shifting position. It's unsettling every time, but it's explainable. I made another note on my sheet. Significant rigor in hands will require extended massage. The machine's timer indicated we were at the 1 gallon mark. I checked his neck, chest, and arms for proper distribution. The fluid was reaching the extremities. I could see the slight swelling. The color changed from death gray to a more lifelike tone. Everything was proceeding normally, except his left eye was open again. Wider this time. Not a quarter inch. Half open, maybe more. And the eye cap was clearly visible, the little plastic spikes catching the light, because the eyelid had retracted significantly. "Come on," I muttered, walking back to his head. This was becoming irritating. I removed the eye cap, checked that the eye itself wasn't swollen or misshapen, and selected a larger cap from my supplies. I placed it carefully, ensuring it sat properly in the socket, and used a dab of super glue on the eyelid, a trick we use for stubborn cases. I pressed the lid down and held it for 30 seconds. It stayed closed. I checked the right eye as a precaution. Still sealed tight. The machine beeped. 1.5 gallons delivered. I was making good time. I'd finish the arterial injection, do the cavity embalming with the trocar, get him dressed and into the casket, and still have time to complete my paperwork before the morning staff arrived. I began massaging his right arm, working the fluid into the tissue, checking for any resistance or areas that weren't receiving adequate preservation. The muscle was cold and firm under my gloved hands. Professional, routine. I moved down to his hand, beginning to work on opening that rigid fist. His fingers were locked tight. I applied steady pressure, working each finger individually, using massage techniques to break up the rigor mortis. Slowly, gradually, his hand began to open. There was something in his palm, a small piece of paper, crumpled and damp with perspiration or decomposition fluid. It must have been clutched in his hand when he died, and nobody had noticed. Not the roommate, not the police, not the medical examiner during the autopsy. I carefully extracted it, set it aside on my instrument tray, and continued working on his hand until it was fully relaxed and positioned naturally. Then I moved to his left hand, repeating the process. His left hand was even tighter. It took several minutes of sustained effort to get the fingers to extend. But there was nothing in this palm, just deep nail marks where he'd been clenching so hard. I checked the machine. 2 gallons delivered. Time to switch to the next stage. I turned off the pump, removed the arterial tube, and ligated the vessels. I'd return to the jugular drainage in a moment, but first I needed to do the cavity embalming, using a long, hollow needle called a trocar to puncture the organs and aspirate fluids, then inject concentrated cavity fluid. I picked up the trocar, a gleaming steel instrument about 18 inches long with a sharp point. I positioned it 2 inches above and 2 inches to the left of the navel, the standard entry point. I pushed firmly, feeling the familiar resistance and then the give as it penetrated the abdominal wall. That's when I heard it, a sound from Tyler Bennett's body, not air escaping, not fluid movement, a sound that came from his throat, a low, sustained groan. My hands froze. The trocar stayed where it was, partially inserted into his abdomen. Every hair on my body stood up. The room suddenly felt 20 degrees colder. Bodies don't make sounds like that. Yes, they can release air when you move them. Yes, decomposition gases can cause groaning noises, but not like this. This was sustained. This had a quality to it that my lizard brain recognized immediately as vocal. I pulled the trocar out slowly, set it down with a trembling hand, and stared at Tyler Bennett's face. His eyes were both open, wide open, not partially, fully open, and they were looking at me. Number. No, that's impossible. I'd verified death. He had an autopsy, for God's sake. His chest was stapled shut after they'd removed and examined his organs. He had no heartbeat, no respiration. His blood had been replaced with formaldehyde. He was clinically, legally, scientifically dead. But those eyes were looking at me. The irises were clouded, yes, but they were centered on my face, tracking my movement as I took an involuntary step backward. Jesus Christ, I whispered. His mouth opened wider. The wire holding his jaw shut pulled taut but held, and from somewhere deep in his chest cavity came another sound. Longer this time, still that low groan, but with variation in pitch, almost like he was trying to form words. I need to call someone. Tom. 911. Someone. This isn't possible. This isn't happening. But I couldn't move. I was transfixed by those eyes, by the impossibility unfolding on my embalming table. His right hand, the one I'd just carefully relaxed in position, began to curl again, slowly, deliberately, the fingers contracting one by one until it was a fist again. Then his left hand did the same. I found my voice. Tyler? Can you hear me? What are you doing, Daniel? He's dead. You've embalmed him. You've injected 2 gallons of poison into his circulatory system. This is some kind of neurological reflex, some post-mortem response you've never encountered before. But it's not consciousness. It can't be. His eyes remained fixed on mine. His mouth worked against the wire. And then, clear enough that there was no mistaking it, I heard a word. Help! The whisper came from his lips. Impossible, because the vocal cords are muscles and nerves and require air from functioning lungs. And his lungs were full of formaldehyde and collapsed and removed during autopsy, and then placed back and... Help me! I ran. I don't remember making the decision. My body just moved, carrying me away from the table, up the basement stairs into the main hallway. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I called Tom. It rang 4 times before he answered, voice thick with sleep. Daniel? What's wrong? Tom, I need you to come in, right now. There's a situation with the Bennett case. What kind of situation? Can it wait until morning? No, it can't. Please, I need someone else here. Something in my voice must have convinced him. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. I stood in the hallway, breathing hard, trying to convince myself to go back downstairs. My professional training warred with my primal instinct to get out of the building. After 5 minutes, I forced myself to move. I descended the stairs slowly, my phone's flashlight on, even though the fluorescent lights were still running. I could hear the embalming machine still humming. I'd left it on. Wasteful, unprofessional. I reached the doorway to the prep room and looked in. Tyler Bennett was exactly as I'd left him. Eyes closed, mouth closed, hands relaxed at his sides, positioned naturally. The trocar was on my instrument tray where I'd set it. I approached the table cautiously, as if he might suddenly sit up, but he remained motionless. I checked his carotid. No pulse, obviously. His skin was cool and firming up nicely with the preservation fluid. His eyes, when I lifted the lids to check, showed no response. Fixed and dilated pupils. The eye caps had somehow stayed in place this time. I examined his hands. No tension, no fists. Just the relaxed position I'd worked them into. Had I imagined the entire thing? Some kind of stress-induced hallucination. I'd been doing double shifts lately. Maybe I'd fallen asleep standing up, had a micro-sleep dream. That happens to people, doesn't it? But then I saw the piece of paper I'd extracted from his right hand. It was still on my instrument tray, exactly where I'd placed it. So that part was real. I picked it up and carefully unfolded it. The paper was damp and fragile. Written in blue ink, in handwriting that was barely legible, were 4 words: I didn't want to. My skin went cold again. A suicide note fragment? Something he'd written in his final moments? But why clutch it so tightly that rigor mortis locked it in his hand for days? Tom arrived at 11:50 p.m. I heard his car pull into the lot, his footsteps upstairs, then descending to the prep room. He found me standing by the table, staring at Tyler Bennett's peaceful, dead face. "What's going on, Daniel?" "You sounded terrified on the phone." I told him everything. The eyes opening, the hands clenching, the sounds, the word help. I told him even though I knew how insane it sounded, how unprofessional, how it would make him question whether I was fit to continue in this job. Tom listened without interrupting. When I finished, he walked around the table slowly, examining the body. He checked my prep work, the incisions, the embalming machine's readings. "You've done good work here," he said finally. "Proper distribution, good color. Everything looks textbook. Tom, I'm telling you, he moved. He spoke. Daniel, you know that's not possible. Look at him. He's fully embalmed. He's been dead for days. His internal organs were removed and examined." Tom's voice was gentle but firm. "You've been working too much. When's the last time you took a day off? This wasn't exhaustion. This was a stressful case late at night, and your mind played tricks. It happens. First year I worked here, I was convinced I saw old Mrs. Patterson sit up in her casket during a viewing. Turned out I'd been awake for 36 hours straight." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Go home. I'll finish this case. Take tomorrow off. Get some sleep." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? The body was motionless. The evidence was gone except for that scrap of paper, which could be explained rationally. And I did sound insane. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll finish the paperwork first." "No, I'll handle it. Just go home, Daniel." I gathered my things, took off my apron and gloves, and headed for the stairs. At the doorway, I looked back. Tom was already resuming the embalming process, inserting the trocar for cavity treatment. Tyler Bennett's body remained still and compliant. Just death, just biology, just chemistry. That's what I told myself on the drive home. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed as the sun came up, replaying every moment, trying to convince myself Tom was right. But those eyes, that voice, the deliberate way the hands had clenched. At 9 a.m., unable to stand it anymore, I started researching. I spent hours reading about post-mortem reflexes, about gases trapped in bodies, about every biological explanation for apparent movement in corpses. I found cases of bodies sitting up during cremation due to muscle contraction from heat. I found stories of sounds caused by decomposition. I found rational explanations for everything except what I'd witnessed. Then I started researching Tyler Bennett himself. I found his obituary online, which gave basic information. I found his social media profiles, mostly private, but his Facebook profile picture showed a smiling man with kind eyes. I found a news article about his death. Local man found dead in apparent suicide. But then I found something else. An older article from 6 months earlier. Man rescued after bizarre hostage situation at downtown office. I read it with growing unease. Tyler Bennett had been one of 3 people held hostage by a former co-worker who'd been fired. The standoff lasted 8 hours. All hostages were eventually released physically unharmed. The perpetrator was arrested. The article mentioned that the hostages were receiving counseling. 6 months later, Tyler hung himself in his apartment, but something about the article bothered me. I went to the comments section, always a mistake, usually full of speculation and insensitivity. But one comment stopped me cold. A user named Jen H. had written, "My brother was one of the other hostages. He hasn't been the same since. Says the man who took them wasn't acting alone. Says he kept talking to someone who wasn't there. Please pray for all of them." I searched for more information about the hostage situation, but found nothing beyond that initial article. I tried to find the other hostages' names, but privacy laws protected their identities. My phone rang. "Tom, Daniel, I need you to come in. Now. Don't ask questions. Just get here." His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. I arrived at the funeral home at 10:30 a.m. Tom met me at the door, his face ashen. "When you left last night, Bennett was positioned properly, correct?" Hands at his sides. "Yes, you saw him. You were there. Come with me." We went down to the prep room. Tyler Bennett was in the casket now, dressed in the suit his family had provided. The casket lid was propped open. Both of his hands were clenched in fists. Tight, rigid fists with the knuckles pressed against the white satin lining. Tom looked at me. I positioned him last night. Standard pose, hands clasped over his abdomen. I checked him before I left at 3 a.m. Everything was perfect. He paused. This morning, when I came in to do the final inspection before the family viewing tonight, I found him like this. We stared at the body in silence. Then Tom noticed something. He leaned in, his face inches from Tyler's right fist. There's something in his hand again. Using forceps, Tom carefully pried the fingers open. It took effort. The rigor had returned, which shouldn't be possible at this stage. Finally, the hand opened. Another piece of paper, different from the first. This one looked newer, crisper. Tom extracted it with the forceps and unfolded it on the nearby counter. In the same blue ink, the same barely legible handwriting. He made me do it. He's still here. Tom and I looked at each other. I watched the color drain from his face as the implications hit him. "Where did this paper come from?" I asked. "Where could he have gotten paper? He's been dead for days. He's been in our custody since yesterday." Tom had no answer. We checked the security footage from overnight. The cameras showed the prep room clearly. Tom working on the body, finishing the embalming, dressing Tyler, positioning him in the casket. Tom leaving at 3:07 a.m. The room empty and still for hours. Then, at 6:13 a.m., just as the sun was rising, both of Tyler Bennett's hands, clearly visible in the casket, slowly curled into fists. No one was in the room. No explanation. Just the hands moving on their own. Tom called the family and explained that there was a delay with the preparation. He didn't give details. Then he called Father Morrison from St. Anthony's, who came and said prayers over the body. Then Tom called a colleague from a funeral home in Chicago, a man who'd been in the business for 40 years, to get a second opinion. The colleague arrived and whose name was Richard, examined Tyler's body with clinical precision. He measured, checked temperature, assessed tissue firmness, reviewed our embalming records. After an hour, he called us into the arrangement office. "Gentlemen, I have no explanation. The body is properly preserved. There's no biological mechanism for what you're describing. But," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I've been doing this long enough to know that death isn't always straightforward. In my career, I've handled 3 cases that I couldn't explain. Bodies that seemed to resist preservation, remains that were found in positions they couldn't have gotten into on their own. One case where the family insisted the deceased's expression changed between the private viewing and the funeral service. And the photographs proved they were right." "What did you do?" Tom asked. completed the service as professionally as possible, and tried to forget about it. What else can you do? You can't investigate the dead. Richard looked at me. But if I were you, son, I'd find out more about Tyler Bennett's life. Sometimes when things like this happen, there's unfinished business, something the deceased needs communicated. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts or spirits, but I do believe that we don't understand everything about what we are and what remains when we die. The family viewing was that evening at 6 p.m. We'd repositioned Tyler's hands and secured them with additional wire underneath the sleeves where it wouldn't show. Tom and I stayed in the building, monitoring from the office. The family arrived, parents, siblings, friends. The viewing proceeded normally for the first hour. Then Tyler's mother, a small woman with gray hair and red-rimmed eyes, approached Tom with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for taking care of my boy," she said. "I know it was hard. I know what happened was hard to deal with." She lowered her voice. Tyler had been struggling. Ever since that incident at his work, he kept saying someone was in his apartment, that he wasn't alone. We tried to get him help, but he wouldn't listen. Toward the end, he stopped sleeping, said if he slept, he would make him do things. Tom gently asked who he was. We never knew. Tyler wouldn't say, but he was terrified. And then, she broke down sobbing. After the family left, Tom and I discussed what to do. The funeral was scheduled for the next morning. We agreed to keep the casket closed despite the family's original request for it to be opened during the service. Tom told them there had been additional settling that affected the cosmetic presentation. A lie, but necessary. I stayed at the funeral home that night. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to face whatever this was. Tom stayed too. We took turns keeping watch, neither of us willing to leave the other alone. At 2:30 a.m., I was sitting in a chair in the chapel where Tyler's casket rested on its bier, surrounded by flowers. The room was dark except for the small spotlights illuminating the casket. I heard it clearly in the silence, a soft thumping from inside the casket. Rhythmic, deliberate, like someone knocking. I stood up, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I approached the casket instead. The thumping continued, growing slightly louder. Then it stopped. I stood there in the darkness, my hand on the smooth wood of the casket lid, knowing I should open it, but unable to make myself do it. "Tyler," I whispered, "if you can hear me, if some part of you is still here, I'm listening." "What do you need me to know?" The silence stretched. Then, muffled but unmistakable, a voice from inside the casket. "Tell them about him." "Tell them about who?" "The man who wasn't there." A pause, then, "He's looking for someone else now." The funeral proceeded the next morning. Father Morrison gave a moving eulogy about life's fragility and the importance of mental health support. The family wept. Friends shared memories of Tyler, his kindness, his humor, his struggles. It was a beautiful service. When everyone had left and we were preparing to transport the casket to the cemetery, Tom and I made a decision. We opened the casket one final time to check. Tyler's hands were clasped peacefully over his chest. His face was calm, and there was no trace of the terror that had marked the previous 2 days. Whatever had been keeping some part of him here had finally released its grip. I found Jenna Sheets from the comment section. Her full name was Jennifer Harper. It took some detective work, but I managed to reach her through Facebook. I told her I was researching the hostage situation for a memorial article. She agreed to talk. Her brother was named David. He died 4 months after the incident. Carbon monoxide poisoning in his garage. His car's engine running. The death was ruled accidental, but Jennifer believed otherwise. He was terrified, she told me over the phone. Just like Tyler must have been. He kept saying the man from the incident, the one who took them hostage, had something attached to him, something that watched, something that could reach inside your head and make you think things, do things. Was there a third hostage? I asked. Yes, a woman named Catherine. She moved away immediately after. I tried to find her but couldn't. David said she understood what was happening, that she'd experienced it before. I never found Catherine, but I did find one more thing. The man who took them hostage, whose name was Derek Hoffman, died by suicide in county jail 3 days after his arrest. Hanging, just like Tyler 6 months later. Just like David 4 months after that. The medical examiner noted in Derek Hoffman's autopsy report that his hands were clenched so tightly they'd had to break his fingers to open them for fingerprinting. I still work at Oakwood Funeral Home, but I transferred to the day shift. I told Tom I needed better work-life balance, and he understood. I've handled hundreds of cases since Tyler Bennett, and nothing like that has ever happened again. But sometimes, late at night when I'm home alone, I think about what he said. He's looking for someone else now. I wonder if somewhere, there's another person feeling what Tyler felt, being influenced by something they can't see, being pushed toward an ending they don't want. I kept both pieces of paper. I didn't want to, and he made me do it. He's still here. They're in a locked drawer in my desk at home. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, wondering if I should have done more, investigated further, warned someone. But warned them about what? What would I even say? Have you ever felt like you weren't in control of your own thoughts? Like something was whispering suggestions that felt like they came from inside your own head? If you've ever experienced that, I'd like to hear your story, because I think Tyler was trying to warn us about something that nobody wants to acknowledge might be real. Some stories don't end. They just find new people to haunt. And I can't shake the feeling that Tyler Bennett's story isn't over. It's just moved on to someone else. If you've seen signs of this, subscribe and let me know in the comments. There are patterns in death that we don't talk about, connections that seem impossible until you see them yourself.